It's been 3 years since the initial Pavotubes came out, and Nanlite has recently introduced their Pavotube II series, which a lot of influencers have already picked up and given rave reviews for. But how does this fare for the professional film world? Could this actually be an Astera tube replacement? Let's find out. First things first, the Pavotube 2s come in a family of 3 sizes, like the Asteras. They have a 2-foot, a 4-foot, and an 8-foot tube, and they all have internal batteries, which at max power will run you just under 2 hours. Both the Titan tube and this Pavotube 30X, which is their 4-foot version, have virtually the same output, so they're pretty well matched to start. One thing to note is that their 4-foot tube isn't quite 4 feet, but it is slightly longer than an Astera tube. This follows with the rest of their lineup. The Pavotube 2 seems pretty solid, but the first thing that I notice is that it does have a slight shake to it where it seems like the internal components aren't fully secured to the outer shell, which is always a little concerning, but maybe that's for a little extra shock protection for the internal electronics. I'm not totally sure, but it doesn't seem to have an effect whatsoever on the performance of the tube in any way. It's just something that I notice in comparison to the Titan tube, which just seems really solid. That being said, these are the upgraded models of their previous Alta tubes under their now defunct brand LED Go, which are kind of famous for their insane crush-proof test. But these are not IP rated, whereas the Astera tubes are IP65 for those wet weather days. The Pavotube 2s do, however, have a host of accessories, one of which is a waterproof housing where you could fully submerge this in water. And while I'm on this topic, they have some of the best and most affordable tube clamps in various sizes available. What I really like is the Octagonal End Caps, which allow it to easily be set in place on a flat surface at different angles, which is a really nice touch because you can't do that with an Astera tube, and we are often setting tubes on the ground with a little glow against a wall. And they're black, which is great for concealing them on set. I kind of like that the power and DMX connections are all on one side of the tube versus like the Rainbow 2 tubes, which use both sides, but it's honestly just a different way of figuring out how to mount tubes. And in certain situations, you may need to choose a different tube simply because of the way it's wired if you need a very particular way of mounting them within a set. The buttons have nice actuation. They give a nice click, which really solidifies that you are pressing the button. And I love the on-off switch, which is something that can be frustrating on Asteras where you have to hold to turn them on, but turning them off is a single tap. So if you're trying to blue mode them, you end up accidentally turning half of them off in the process. The screen is pretty basic, but it gets the job done. You can see the battery life in hours on the top right, and you can even lock the display by holding the lock button. It's not as nice as Astera's screen, which also gives you a little more info and has the ability to display the fixture number now in big numbers. But honestly, once lights go out on a set, I'm hardly looking at that screen, if ever, as a console programmer. My job is to control lights remotely, so the only thing that I do every now and then is monitor battery life and switch runtime if that's something that the gaffer wants to use as a tool. And that's the biggest difference between the Pavotubes and the Asteras. If you want to manage, say, 100 tubes, the Nanlite app just isn't as sophisticated for that as the Astera app, and rightly so. I mean, Astera has been working on their app for years longer. You can't simply select multiple tubes and auto-address them, or even change their mode in the Nanlite app, and the battery life symbol isn't very informative as it doesn't give you a percentage readout. However, all of that is not necessarily a bad thing, and there are issues with configuring lights in an app. It's just a different light, and you work it differently the same as you would configure Kinos differently than sky panels. Now, I'm gonna make a really bold statement here. I would actually say that you could get 100 of these Nanlite tubes up and running probably 10 times or more faster than 100 Astera tubes. Why? Because you just configure them on their head, and there's only 3 settings that you need to change: their mode, pixel count, and address. I'll go into the menu, set the address, change the mode, and set my pixel count. And that's it. It took 15 seconds. Oh, and watch this firmware update. Guys, it was 11 seconds. 11. 100 tubes would take like a half an hour to update and address. And when you put it like that to all the Astera users out there, that is mind-blowing. I think the fastest I got 100 Astera tubes up and running was about 6 hours, because as you may know my rant from one of my previous videos, rental houses are generally terrible at updating firmware on lights. So it's left to you to have to update the tablet, then the app, the firmware on the Art7 box, and finally, all of your fixtures. And each of these processes can take a while, especially when they stop halfway through an update and have to restart. 6 hours versus 30 minutes. So in a lot of ways, simpler is better. Nanlite also has great DMX profiles for these units, which is a relief as so many manufacturers just can't get it right and make it frustrating to control their fixtures. The Pavotubes go from 2700 Kelvin to 12,000 Kelvin CCT, and they match the Astera line with 8, 16, and 32 pixels for their respective tubes. So there's a lot you can do with these units. The biggest downside of the Pavotubes, though, is that they don't have an internal CRMX receiver. And that can be a deal breaker on some sets where you're placing tubes in random places trying to utilize them all wirelessly, and attaching a receiver to the light just isn't ideal. But because of that, they are a lot cheaper than Astera's. An 8 light kit is only $5,000 off B&H, whereas a Titan kit of 8 lights is $8,300. So if you're used to using Blackout or another lighting console wirelessly, you'll have to plan to put battery-powered receivers on these lights with their DMX dongle if you want to use them run-and-gun style. And honestly, it's not that bad if you strap them on the end of the tube. But for running these in an overhead rig where you have the ability to power and run data to them, this could very well be a much cheaper solution to Astera's. Overall, I see these being a great rigging tool for those that need a cheaper solution than Astera's, and of course, these are amazing for the independent one-man band creator or filmmaker going around with a few tubes they want to control through Nanlite's own app or even manually. What do you think? Let me know in the comments if you see yourself using these for your sets. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.